A car stalled in the middle of a rainy night. A choice that seemed impossible. That man, a single father struggling against accusations he had no strength to fight, was driving home after a double shift, body drained, eyes burning with exhaustion. Every dollar he earned was to keep his daughter from being placed in foster care. The road ahead blurred behind the curtain of rain, mirroring the chaos that was swallowing his life a little more each day. And then, in the darkness, he saw her. A stranger standing by the roadside, rain pouring down as if tearing the sky apart. Her luxury car blinked weakly with its hazard lights. She was cold, desperate, utterly alone in the vast emptiness. He could have driven past. He should have driven past. He had every reason to turn away, to pretend he didn't see. But he stopped. And he could never have known that this small act of kindness would become the most dangerous, yet the most miraculous, decision of his life. Before we continue, where in the world are you watching this story from? Leave a comment, and remember to subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Who knows, maybe the story you tell will be the next video we share. And now, what truly awaited him on that stormy night? Do you think he should have stopped or kept driving? The windshield wipers swayed back and forth in an endless rhythm, and Jason Miller's eyes burned after finishing a double shift. Loading cargo, scanning barcodes, moving non-stop. Because if he stopped, if he let himself think too long about the court date circled in red ink on the calendar stuck to his kitchen wall, he knew he would fall apart. 3 more weeks. He had only 3 weeks left before everything ended. Sleepless nights had become far too familiar. Jason couldn't even remember the last time he had a full night's rest. Every single night, he lay staring at the ceiling, calculating in silence. If he lost the case, he could face up to 5 years in prison. 5 years. More than enough to lose all of Susan's childhood. She would be 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, all the most important years of her life. He would not be there. Who would remind her to brush her teeth before bedtime? Who would check her homework? Who would sit beside her bed and tell stories until she drifted off to sleep? Who would explain to an 8-year-old child why the only parent she had suddenly disappeared? Jason tightened his grip on the steering wheel, trying to push away the thoughts weighing heavily on his mind. 6 months ago, his life wasn't perfect, but at least it still had meaning. He had worked at Green Vista Landscaping for 4 years. The job was hard, but he liked it. Liked the fresh air. Liked the feeling of seeing results created by his own 2 hands. Rick Caldwell, the owner, had treated his employees fairly well. At least, that was what Jason used to believe. Until $47,000 vanished from the company account. $47,000. That number haunted Jason every minute of every day. $47,000, more than his entire income over 2 exhausting years. And Rick Caldwell had looked him straight in the eyes, cold and unwavering, and accused him of taking the money. The worst part? Rick knew exactly how to manipulate people. Falsified financial records, forged signatures, a chain of fabricated emails. All of it pointed to Jason. And Rick had better lawyers, better connections, better everything. The evidence looks really bad, Michael Bennett, the public defender assigned to his case, had said the week before, his kind eyes full of sympathy that, in Jason's situation, felt more like pity. I believe you're innocent, Jason. But proving it will be very hard. If convicted, he would face the maximum sentence. 5 years. 5 years away from Susan. 5 years for her to face the foster care system because her mother had left when she was only 2, leaving behind nothing but a messy scribble on a piece of paper. I wasn't born for this life. Jason had never blamed Laura. Not entirely. He understood that being a mother wasn't easy, especially when she was so young, so lost, unsure of what to do. But abandoning a 2-year-old child and a man who had never learned how to raise a kid? That he could never understand. For 6 years, Jason had raised Susan alone. Every day was a new challenge. How to tie a little girl's hair, how to explain things she needed to know as she grew up, how to teach her to become a strong girl, when he himself was still struggling with his own helplessness. But he tried. God, he tried with everything he had. And now, everything could be taken away by a man desperate to hide his own crime. Jason's car slowed down. Weak hazard lights blinked through the heavy curtain of rain. A luxurious red sedan stood on the shoulder of Charles River Parkway, the kind of car worth more than everything he had earned in 5 years of work. A woman stood beside it, her silhouette blurred in the downpour, hands frantically tapping at her phone. Jason's foot eased off the gas pedal on its own. "Just keep driving," a tired voice echoed in his head. "You're exhausted. She definitely has emergency services. Someone who drives a car like that surely has insurance, has money, has people who can help." But something in her posture, the way her shoulders trembled, he couldn't tell if from the cold or from despair, made his chest tighten. His mother's voice suddenly rang in his mind, so clear it made him swallow hard. As if she were sitting right beside him in the passenger seat. "The real you isn't who you are when everything is going well, Jason. It's who you are when life is falling apart." She had been gone for 3 years. Cancer. 8 months from diagnosis to the final day. Too quick. Never enough time. Never enough time with the people we love. She taught him that character mattered most. A man was defined by how he treated others when no one was watching. That kindness wasn't weakness. It was the only strength worth honoring. Jason's jaw tightened. His life had been shattered enough already. But maybe, right now was exactly when he needed to hold on to what his mother had taught him. His car came to a complete stop behind the red sedan. The rain slammed down like a wall of water the moment Jason stepped out of his car. His clothes, already soaked, were drowned again in the heavy downpour within seconds. He raised a hand as he approached, making sure she could see him clearly, each step slow and cautious. The woman turned around. Even through the blurred curtain of rain, Jason saw her body stiffen. Fear. She was afraid of him. Of course she was. A lone woman on a deserted road in the middle of the night, with a strange man walking toward her. Anyone would react that way. "Ma'am," Jason called, keeping a safe distance, making sure both of his hands were visible. "Are you all right? Car trouble?" She hesitated, studying him carefully. Rain ran down her face, her hair and clothes drenched. Then, as if making a final decision, she nodded. It stalled. "It won't start again." Her voice was strangely calm for the situation, controlled, steady, the kind of voice used to being respected, listened to. "Would you mind if I take a look?" Jason asked. "I'm no professional, but I've kept enough old cars alive for a few extra years. Might be able to help." Another moment of hesitation, then she answered, "All right, I'd appreciate it." She opened the hood, and Jason stepped forward. Rain pounded against the back of his neck as he leaned over the engine. For a brief moment, he was grateful for the distraction. This was a problem he could handle. This didn't involve lawyers or courtrooms or the fear in his daughter's eyes. His fingers traced the wires and connections. Within minutes, he found the issue. "Your positive terminal's loose," he called over the roaring rain. "Probably got shaken by a pothole. Do you have a toolkit?" "No, I don't think so." Jason turned and ran back to his car, rain streaming down his face like a waterfall. He grabbed his toolkit from the trunk. As he tightened the connection and scraped away the corrosion with the edge of an old rag, he spoke without thinking, the same way he talked when Susan couldn't sleep. "This battery's close to dying," he said, his numb fingers still working steadily. "You should replace it soon. There's a gas station about 2 miles up. They sell them there." He could feel her eyes on him as he worked. Despite the dark, Jason could make out details about her. Intelligent eyes, a quiet, composed authority, the kind of person who made big decisions every day. A soft click sounded as the connection snapped into place. Jason stood up, wiping rain from his eyes. "Try it now." She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Relief washed over her face, genuine and unmistakable, softening every line of her expression. "How much do I owe you?" She had already reached for her wallet. Jason shook his head, stepping back toward his car. "Just glad I could help, ma'am." "Wait," she called. "At least tell me your name so I can thank the right person." Jason turned back. Rain poured down his face. In that brief moment, their eyes met fully. He saw gratitude in hers, and something else, a quiet respect, as if she saw in him something the rest of the world had overlooked. "Jason," he said. Then, too tired to bother with restraint, too worn down by a trial only 3 weeks away, for caution to mean anything anymore. "Jason Miller." "Thank you." "Jason Miller," she said, her voice warm even as she shivered from the cold rain. "You may have saved my whole night." If only she knew, Jason thought as he climbed into his car. If only she knew she'd just been helped by a man the world believed was a thief. He drove off, watching her hazard lights shrink and disappear in his rearview mirror. He didn't ask her name, and he believed that, in the next 3 weeks, none of this would matter. But he was wrong. Very wrong. 3 weeks later, Jason sat inside the Suffolk County Superior Court, wearing a cheap suit borrowed from Michael Bennett, because he couldn't afford a decent one for the most important day of his life. His palms were damp, his heart pounding so violently, he thought he might faint right there in his seat. This was it. The moment that would decide his future. The moment that would answer the question, would he be tucking Susan into bed like every night? Or would he spend the next 5 years watching her grow up through the glass barrier of a prison visitation room? Michael Bennett sat beside him, arranging his papers with the practiced precision of someone who had done this for far too long. But Jason still caught a flicker of worry in the man's eyes. They both knew how things looked. They both understood what usually happened to men like Jason when they went up against men like Rick Caldwell. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Allison Green," the bailiff announced. Jason stood on trembling legs. He stared at the floor. He didn't have the courage to look up. He didn't want to see the face of the person who held his entire future in her hands. But then something made him glance upward. Maybe instinct. Maybe some invisible thread of fate pulling him. The judge entered, her black robe billowing with each step. Her posture was poised, authoritative, the kind of person whose every movement carried the weight of power. She took her seat behind the bench, and Jason's breath caught in his throat. Wait. He knew that face, those eyes, that composed, quietly commanding presence she carried like a second skin. Jason's mind snapped back to the night of the storm. The woman by the red car. The grateful look in her eyes when he tightened her battery terminal. The small nod. The steady, calm voice. No. No way. But the more he looked, the more certain he became. And the more certain he became, the more impossible it felt. The woman he had helped just 3 weeks earlier was now sitting behind the bench, holding the gavel that could determine his fate. His heart hammered so hard it felt as if it might tear through his ribs. Was he imagining this? The courtroom lighting was nothing like the rainy night. Cold fluorescent lights instead of darkness and downpour. She wore a severe judicial robe instead of soaking wet clothes. Her hair was neatly pinned up instead of falling loose around her face. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe his stressed mind was stitching together hope from scattered memories. But those eyes, that bone structure, the way she sat straight-backed, speaking little yet commanding the entire room into silence. Jason clutched the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to speak, to ask, to confirm. But how? What would he even say? "Your Honor, did I fix your car 3 weeks ago?" Just thinking it sounded ridiculous and entirely inappropriate. He glanced toward Michael Bennett, but the attorney was still focused on the documents, completely unaware of the hurricane tearing through Jason's mind. The judge, Judge Green, the bailiff had said, continued reading the files, her expression perfectly neutral. If she recognized him, she didn't show it. Not a flicker, not a pause, not a single familiar look. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe Jason was simply losing his grip on reality. The hearing began. Jason tried to focus, tried to hold on to every word from Prosecutor Andrew Collins and Bennett's response, but his mind kept drifting back to the face behind the bench, unable to break free. Too similar. Far too similar. But how could it be? What were the odds? Throughout the entire proceeding, Jason kept stealing glances at Judge Green, comparing the woman drenched in rain to the one holding his life in her hands. Each time he looked, he became more convinced it was her, and each time he told himself he must be losing his mind. Then something happened that made his heart stop. The prosecutor was presenting heavily photocopied financial documents when Judge Green leaned forward, her eyes sharpening as she examined them. "Mr. Collins, this is a photocopy," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Where is the original?" Jason's breath jammed in his chest. It was her. It had to be her. But through the entire exchange, she never looked at him. Not once. She gave no sign that she recognized him. Her expression remained totally professional as she questioned the prosecutor. "I have concerns about these documents," she said, her tone cold and precise. "The court will not proceed on a photocopy of a photocopy. Mr. Bennett, I'm granting your request for forensic authentication. We will reconvene when properly verified documents are provided." The gavel came down with a sharp, cracking strike. Jason flinched. As the courtroom shuffled to its feet, Jason remained frozen. Bennett was speaking into his ear, saying this was rare, that they had actually gotten lucky. But Jason barely heard a word. His eyes stayed locked on Judge Green as she gathered her files and stepped into her chambers. Was it her? Had the woman he'd helped on a cold, stormy night just saved him in return? Or was he simply so desperate that he was seeing hope where none existed? He wanted to believe it. God, he wanted to believe it so badly. But he wasn't sure. And that uncertainty would haunt him for the next 2 weeks. Allison Green leaned back against the door of her chambers, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed it to the cold wood. Her heart was racing so fast it was hard to breathe, her mind spinning from the magnitude of what had just happened. Jason Miller, the man who had stopped his car in a torrential downpour to help her. The man who had given her a tired smile, refused money, said his name, and disappeared into the night. She had seen the recognition in his eyes when she walked into the courtroom. She had seen the moment he froze, the flicker of confusion, hope, and doubt that crossed his face. He suspected it. But he wasn't sure. And she had given him absolutely no sign to confirm it. Allison's face had stayed perfectly neutral, because with even the slightest expression, the slightest acknowledgement that she knew him, she would have been forced to recuse herself immediately, and if she stepped away, the case would fall into the hands of Judge Charles Morton. Allison pressed her fingers to her temples. She had bent every ethical rule she had ever been taught. She had used her authority as a judge to order forensic verification of evidence, something that should have been done months ago. She had acted in favor of a defendant she had previously interacted with outside of court. But what choice did she have? Let an innocent man go to prison just because the system was too lazy to do its job properly? She had gone through the files. She knew how flimsy the evidence was. Unsupported, easily dismantled if anyone bothered to examine it properly. But Judge Stephen Carlin, before her, had been too indifferent, too complacent. He refused the forensic review because it was costly and time-consuming. Jason Miller was being cornered, and the only person who could stop it was her, the one person who should have stepped away the moment she heard his name. Sometimes justice demanded choices no one wanted to make. Allison just hoped she had chosen correctly. 3 years. She had been behind the bench for 3 years. Before that, Allison had spent 7 years as a prosecutor. 10 years in the justice system had convinced her she had seen every kind of tragedy. Innocent people are going to jail because they couldn't afford a lawyer. Guilty people walking free because they knew the right people. A system designed to protect the wealthy and crush the poor. She had tried to change that from within. That was why she became a judge. She wanted, at least in her courtroom, for justice to mean something more than money and influence. But she had never faced a situation like today. She knew Jason Miller. Not deeply. Just one night, one moment, one act of kindness. But enough to understand what kind of man he was. A man who stopped in a storm to help a stranger. A man who used his old, worn tools and let himself get soaked to the bone just to fix the car of someone he had never met. A man who refused money even though he was clearly struggling. That was not the behavior of a thief. That was the behavior of a man with integrity. And she could not, would not, stand by and watch an innocent man be sent to prison because the system was too careless, too heartless, to check the facts. Even if it meant breaking the very rules she had sworn to uphold. And there was something else. In previous hearings, Jason had brought his daughter with him once. The little girl waited in the hallway while the proceedings took place inside. Susan Miller, 8 years old, blonde ponytail, big, worried eyes. She had drawn a picture and asked the bailiff to deliver it to Allison, a judge in a robe drawn like a superhero. The bailiff had said the little girl told him, "She has a magic hammer that makes the bad people go away." Allison still kept that drawing in her desk drawer. Every time she looked at it, she remembered why she chose this job. Not to sit behind the bench with a sense of power, but to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. To make sure children like Susan Miller didn't lose their father simply because the system was too bureaucratic or too corrupt to do what was right. Allison opened the drawer and took out the drawing, the edges slightly wrinkled. "Magic hammer," she whispered. "All right, little one. I'll do my best." 2 weeks passed as slowly as 2 years. Jason lived like a shadow, moving through each day on autopilot. Working at the warehouse, picking up Susan from Mrs. Linda Baker's home, reading her a bedtime story, trying to keep their lives looking normal. But every night when the apartment fell silent, he lay awake. Was it really her? Did she recognize him? Was that why she ordered the forensic review? Or was he simply so desperate that he invented connections that didn't exist? Was he seeing miracles where there was only coincidence? "Daddy, you're thinking too loudly," Susan mumbled one night, half asleep. "It's keeping me up." "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." "Is it about court?" "Yeah. Mrs. Baker says judges are fair. They help good people." "I hope so, Susan. I really hope so." But hope was a double-edged sword. It made people believe in the impossible, and it could crush them when the truth came. On the 5th night after the hearing, Jason couldn't sleep at all. He stood at the living room window of their small apartment, looking down at the quiet Boston street under the pale yellow glow of the streetlights. 3 years he and Susan had lived here. The apartment wasn't big, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen. But it was their home. The walls were covered in Susan's drawings. Rainbows, princesses, family, always 3 people, even though, in reality, there were only 2. "Daddy, when will I have a mom?" The question she asked when she was 5 still stabbed his heart every time he remembered it. "You have me," he had answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Isn't that enough?" Susan had thought for a very long moment, then whispered, "It's enough." but it would be nicer if it were 3. 3. Jason remembered that moment vividly. And now he wondered whether she would even have one parent left, whether Susan would get to keep the only father she had, or not. His phone vibrated at 2:17 a.m. Who would call at this hour? It was Mrs. Baker. "Jason, she's not doing well. She dreamed they took you away. She cried so hard I couldn't calm her. She needs to hear your voice." Jason rushed to the bedroom. Susan was twisting in a nightmare. "Sweetheart," he whispered, sitting beside her and brushing back her sweat-soaked hair. "Daddy's here." "I'm right here." "They took you," Susan cried. "I saw them take you, and I couldn't reach you." "Shh, it was just a dream." But was it a dream? Or a warning? Jason held her tightly, humming the lullaby his mother used to sing to him. Bit by bit, Susan's breathing slowed. She relaxed. She drifted back to sleep. But Jason didn't. He sat there holding his daughter, staring into the cold darkness of the room, and prayed to a God he wasn't sure he still believed in. "Please don't take her from me. Take anything else, but don't take her." On the 12th day, the phone rang. Michael Bennett. "Jason." His voice trembled slightly. "We got the report. And it's everything we needed." Jason's heart stopped. "What?" "The forensic analysis. They found digital evidence. Jason, Rick Caldwell fabricated everything. The bank records confirmed it. You're going to be all right." Jason leaned back against a stack of crates, his mind blank. The phone grew hot in his hand. Tears rushed to his eyes before he could stop them. "We're going back to court tomorrow," Michael continued. "Judge Green wants to hold the session immediately." Judge Green? Was it her? Was it really her? Maybe. Tomorrow he would finally get the answer. The courtroom was much more crowded today. Curious onlookers, a few reporters secretly taking notes, and even some courthouse staff had stopped to watch. Rick Caldwell sat with his team of lawyers, his face drained of all color. Jason sat beside Michael Bennett, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of his chest. "All rise," Judge Green entered. This time, Jason didn't lower his head. He looked straight up. And in the split second, their eyes met. Just a brief flicker. He knew. She knew who he was. She had always known. And she had fought for him. After thoroughly reviewing all evidence, Judge Green began, her voice commanding and flawless, "The court finds that the prosecution's entire case is built on fraudulent documents. Digital bank records confirm that Richard Caldwell, not Jason Miller, committed the embezzlement. Mr. Miller, all charges against you are dismissed with prejudice." The courtroom exploded into whispers, gasps, the clicking of recorders, and chairs scraping across the floor. But Jason heard none of it. His hands trembled so violently that he could barely keep them still. His vision blurred with tears. Freedom. He was free. "Furthermore," Judge Green continued, her voice cutting cleanly through the chaos, "I am referring this case to the district attorney's office with a strong recommendation to prosecute Richard Caldwell for fraud, embezzlement, falsifying documents, and obstruction of justice." The gavel fell with a sharp, decisive crack. Jason looked up. This time, he didn't look away. He looked directly at her. Their eyes met again, only for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. It was her. It had always been her. She had recognized him the moment the name Jason Miller appeared in the file. And she had risked her entire career to save him. Before Jason could stand, before he could form a single coherent thought through the whirlwind in his mind, Judge Green had already risen, gathered her files, and disappeared into her chambers with the absolute professionalism of someone who had simply fulfilled her duty. Michael Bennett pulled him into a hug, talking about compensation, civil suits, new opportunities. But Jason could barely hear him. His eyes stayed locked on the closed door of her chambers. He wanted to thank her. He needed to thank her. But how? How did you approach a judge who had just saved your life and ask if she was the woman whose car you fixed in the rain? It was absurd, inappropriate, not even allowed. So Jason left the courthouse that day with freedom in his hands and a question heavy as stone in his chest. But deep down, he already knew the answer. And somehow, he had to say, thank you. That afternoon, Jason picked up Susan from school. She burst out of the gate, her backpack bouncing wildly behind her. "Daddy, Mrs. Baker said today is the big day." Jason knelt down and wrapped her in his arms, so tightly it felt like he was trying to hold the entire world together. "Are you okay, Daddy?" Susan tugged on his sleeve, looking up at him with wide, worried eyes. "Sweetheart, Daddy is more than okay." Jason choked on his words. "Daddy is free." "Free from what? How did you explain this to an 8-year-old? Free to be with you, every night, from now on." Susan thought for a moment, very seriously, the way children sometimes do. Then she raised an eyebrow and asked softly, "The lady with the magic hammer helped you, right?" Jason let out a laugh as tears filled his eyes again. "Yes, sweetheart. She did." "I like her," Susan declared. "Daddy does too," Jason thought. "Daddy does too." 6 weeks passed as gently as a dream. Jason found a new job at Boston Hardware and Supply. Better pay, easier hours, insurance that actually mattered. For the first time in years, he was home every evening to eat dinner with his daughter. Susan filled the fridge with drawings labeled "Dad is Free," rainbows, stick figures, a handful of charming misspelled words. Life had become good. So good that sometimes Jason struggled to believe the nightmare had ended only a short time ago. But one thing still weighed on him. He had never been able to thank Judge Green properly. Never gotten confirmation of what he already knew in his heart. That she was the woman from the rain that night. That she had recognized him. That she had risked everything to save him. One Thursday afternoon, Jason was stocking shelves in aisle 7. Automotive supplies, strangely fitting since everything had begun here, when a voice behind him spoke. "Excuse me, do you know where the battery terminal connectors are?" Jason turned, and there she was. No judge's robe, no elevated bench, no stern courtroom expression. Just a woman in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose, a soft smile on her lips. "It's you," Jason breathed. The box of wiper blades slipped from his hands and fell to the floor. "I knew it," he said, "in the courtroom. I thought it was you. Then I was scared I was wrong. But I knew." Her smile widened, warm and more sincere than anything he had ever seen. "You recognized me." "How could I not? Your face, your voice. But I kept thinking maybe I imagined it. Maybe my mind was playing tricks because I was too desperate." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "And you knew, all that time. You knew I was the one who fixed your car." "The moment I saw your photo in the case file," Allison said softly, "the coffee cup in my hand fell and shattered. But you couldn't say anything. If I acknowledged it, I would have had to recuse myself, and your case would have gone to Judge Morton." Jason closed his eyes as the realization washed over him. "And Judge Morton would have convicted me." "Almost certainly. He has a 94% conviction rate and very little patience with public defenders." Jason looked at her, his voice tight. "So you risked everything for me. Your career, your reputation, your position." "I could lose my judgeship if anyone found out," Allison said quietly, truthfully. "I broke about 12 ethical guidelines, but if I had to do it again, I would." They stood together in the middle of the hardware store, between boxes of screws, cans of paint, coils of extension cords, and the moment felt almost sacred. "Why?" Jason asked. Why would you risk so much for someone you met only once in the rain? Because that one meeting, Allison replied, told me everything I needed to know about you. She looked at him, her eyes unwavering. The man who stopped his car in a storm to help a stranger, who used his own old worn-out tools, who refused money even though he clearly needed it. That is not someone who steals from others. That is someone with integrity. I wasn't going to let a man like that go to prison just because the justice system was lazy or irresponsible. Jason felt his eyes sting. You saved my life. You saved my daughter from losing her father. You helped me first, Allison said softly. You had every reason to keep driving that night. Exhaustion, fear, worry about your trial. But you still stopped. You showed me something I was afraid the world had lost. Pure kindness. I didn't even know your name, Jason whispered. I know, Allison smiled gently. I realized that later. You told me yours, Jason Miller. But you didn't ask for mine, and I didn't give it. If you had, would things have been different? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe. But maybe everything unfolded exactly as it was meant to. A warm silence stretched between them. Then Allison spoke softly. One more thing. During the hearing, your daughter came once. She had to wait in the hallway. Jason nodded. Susan. Mrs. Baker was sick that day, and I had no one else to watch her. Allison's smile turned tender. She drew a picture for me. She asked the bailiff to bring it in, a judge with a superhero cape. She told him I had a magic hammer that made bad people disappear. Despite the heaviness of the story, Jason laughed, a real laugh, full of relief. She thinks your gavel is real magic. She told her whole class about the kind lady with the magic hammer who saved her dad. I'd like to see more of her drawings, Allison said, then gathered her courage and added, maybe over coffee, if that's allowed, now that the case is closed. Jason felt his heart leap, a feeling both new and familiar, warm and deep. It's allowed, he said, voice thick with emotion. And honestly, I'd really like that. That Saturday, Jason took Susan to the cafe. He had told her that Miss Allison wanted to see her drawings, and Susan spent the entire morning choosing which ones to bring. Then changed outfits 4 times, as if preparing for some grand award ceremony. Is she the lady with the magic hammer? Susan asked while standing on her tiptoes. Yes. Is she pretty? Very. Is she nice? The nicest. Then I'm going to wear my princess dress, the yellow one. Because yellow is the color of happiness. And we're happy now, right, Daddy? Jason knelt down to be eye level with her, his heart nearly overflowing. We're the happiest, sweetheart. Now, standing inside the cafe, watching Susan spot Allison and vibrate with excitement, Jason felt something shift inside his chest, as if a missing piece of his life had just clicked into place. Daddy! Daddy, look! The lady with the magic hammer! Susan yelled, dragging him forward with the unstoppable force of an overjoyed 8-year-old. Allison stood up. Jason clearly saw the moment her expression changed when Susan ran toward her. The professional calm vanished, replaced by warmth and pure joy. I'm Susan, but you can call me Sue. Daddy calls me that when I'm good. And today, I'm very good. She spoke in one breath, then pressed a carefully rolled piece of paper into Allison's hand. Here, this is you with the magic hammer. And this is the cape, because superheroes need capes. Obviously. Obviously, Allison laughed, opening the drawing with genuine affection. It's beautiful, Sue. You're very talented. I know, Susan replied with impressive humility. I'm very good at drawing, and very good at eating pancakes. Do they have pancakes here? Only then did Jason catch up with them, panting as if he had run a marathon. Sue, slow down a little. You're like a tiny tornado. A fast and powerful tornado, Daddy. Thank you. Susan beamed, completely unaware that this wasn't exactly a compliment. Allison laughed, a real, full, warm laugh, and Jason felt himself melt at the sound. In the courtroom, she was sharp, decisive, intimidating enough to leave him breathless. But here, watching her kneel to talk to his daughter, she became someone else entirely. She was approachable. She was warm. She felt like someone who could step into their lives, not just as the judge who saved him, but as someone who belonged here. Over Susan's hot chocolate and coffee for the adults, the conversation flowed easily, naturally, beautifully. Susan launched into a series of elaborate stuffed animal adventures, doing the voices, waving her arms so dramatically she spilled her hot chocolate. Twice. And then Sir Fluffington, "That's my bunny," told Princess Sparkle Paws, "That's my cat," that they had to save the kingdom. But then they realized they couldn't read the map, and they got lost in the grocery store. "That's quite an unexpected plot twist," Allison nodded seriously as she dabbed at the spill with napkins. "I know. I'm full of twists. Daddy says I should write movies." Susan took a big sip, leaving a thick milk mustache across her upper lip. Allison saw it and burst out laughing. Then Susan asked the one question Jason absolutely did not want asked in this setting. "Are you going to be Daddy's girlfriend? Because Mrs. Baker said Daddy's been sad for too long, and he needs a girlfriend." "Susan!" Jason's face flushed so red, he wished the cafe floor would open and swallow him whole. "What? Mrs. Baker said so? Not me, but I agree. You're pretty, and you have a magic hammer. That's basically the best combination." Allison tried, and failed, to suppress her smile, her eyes sparkling with amusement as she looked at Jason, who was dying inside. "Well," she answered gently, "your dad and I will be friends first. Then we'll see where things go, all right?" "Okay, but I want you to know I'm very good at sharing. Daddy and I make very pretty friendship bracelets. If you want one, I'll use all the best colors. Not the boring ones." As Susan launched into an enthusiastic lecture about bracelet-making techniques, Jason and Allison exchanged a glance across the table. She was smiling at him, a smile filled with warmth, understanding, and something else. Something Jason didn't want to name too soon, but his heart recognized instantly. And he knew. This moment was exactly right. Natural. Effortless. As if they had traveled a long, winding path only to return to the starting point. That rainy night when their lives intersected in a small but life-changing moment. The universe had once pushed him to the edge of losing everything, forced him to face his worst fear, and then, in its strange way, it gave him this, a second chance, a new beginning, and a woman who had risked everything to believe in him. Sometimes, kindness finds its way back to us in ways no one could ever predict. Coffee dates slowly turned into a routine. Sometimes Susan came along, sometimes she didn't. But they were always full of laughter, endless stories, and a comfort so natural it surprised both Jason and Allison. They discovered they both loved old movies, that both were so traditional they couldn't cook without triggering the smoke alarm, that both had lost their parents too soon and carried the same quiet sense of responsibility for others. By the fourth date, a trip to the zoo with Susan, they were watching a waddling line of penguins shuffle past. Susan had already sprinted toward the sea lion exhibit, her yellow jacket bright against the gray winter day. "Daddy, hold Miss Allison's hand or she'll get lost," Susan shouted back, already halfway across the walkway. I don't think," Jason stammered. "It's okay," Allison said, gently placing her hand in his. Her fingers were strangely warm in the biting cold. "For safety reasons." "Yeah, safety." Jason nodded, his heart pounding like a drum, and not because of any danger of getting lost. Her hand fit perfectly in his, as if it had belonged there for a long time, as if this moment had always been meant to happen. By the third month, they began having dinners for just the two of them, whenever Mrs. Baker could watch Susan. Actual dates, where they could talk about hopes, fears, and all the things that would never be spoken in a courtroom. Though Susan always demanded full reports afterward. Did you hold hands? Did Dad smile the nervous smile? Did you talk about me? You should talk about me. I'm the most interesting topic. One night, after a warm dinner that lasted so long they lost track of time, Jason walked Allison to her car. The red sedan now had a new battery. Sometimes I joke that I should write a thank you note to the pothole that loosened the old terminal. Allison smiled. Jason, she hesitated. Can I say something? Something I probably shouldn't because it's too soon and might scare you. You can tell me anything. When I saw your name on the case list, when I realized who you were, I was afraid. She leaned lightly against the car, the night breeze stirring her hair. Not because of the ethics, although that was very real, but because in that single meeting by the Charles River, you reminded me of something I thought I no longer believed in. What's that? Kindness. Pure, uncomplicated kindness, without suspicion or expectation. She looked straight into his eyes. You were exhausted, worried, days away from trial. You had every reason to drive away, but you didn't. You used your old worn tools, stood soaked in the storm, and helped a stranger, and you refused money. And I thought, this is someone worth knowing. This is someone worth protecting. Jason felt his eyes burn. Emotion swelled in him so strongly it was hard to breathe. You risked everything for me, he whispered. I risked my career, Allison corrected softly. You risked your daughter. That's not something that compares. What I did was only the bare minimum of what justice should have done. What you did that night was your character. Jason kissed her then, a gentle kiss, careful, full of tenderness and promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Sue is going to faint when she finds out, Jason exhaled. I assume she'll want a full report, Allison laughed. She'll want to know if there were fireworks. And what will you tell her? Jason pulled Allison closer, his voice low and full of joy. I'll tell her. There were fireworks, the best kind. 6 months later, Allison had become a real part of their lives. She knew that Susan hated mushrooms, but would eat any vegetable if you called it power food. Knew that Jason could fix almost anything with duct tape and a bit of determination. Knew that their small apartment held more love than many of the grand mansions she had visited. 1 year and 3 months after the trial that nearly destroyed him, Jason planned a proposal. He chose a ring, not expensive, not flashy, but it sparkled in the exact way that reminded him of how Allison's eyes lit up when she laughed. He planned a sunset proposal at the park where they had their third date, the spot where Susan had made Jason hold Allison's hand so she wouldn't get lost. Mrs. Baker agreed to watch Susan. Everything was perfect. Except for one thing, Susan could not keep a secret, not for 5 minutes. At the park that day, they had just reached the exact spot where Jason intended to kneel when Susan, who was supposed to be at home, jumped out from behind a tree and shouted, Daddy, are you going to ask her to marry us? The ring made your pocket hot. Mrs. Baker said so. Allison raised a hand to her mouth. Her eyes widened, shocked, emotional, undone. Jason stared at his daughter, who was bouncing like a spring, utterly unapologetic. Sue, you were supposed to stay with Mrs. Baker. This was supposed to be a surprise. Me and Mrs. Baker decided I should be here for the big moment. Sorry about the surprise, but surprises are hard. It's like trying not to laugh when someone says the word but. You just can't always do it. A few people in the park began turning around. Some took out their phones. Jason flushed so hard he wished the earth would swallow him, but Allison was laughing and crying at the same time. When their eyes met, she nodded. So Jason knelt, right there in the middle of the crowded park, with Susan bouncing beside him and a gathering of curious strangers forming a circle. "Allison Green," he said, opening the ring box with trembling hands. "You saved me in more ways than you know. You saw me when I was invisible. You believed me when no one else did. You looked at my rusty toolbox and saw character instead of poverty. You looked at my slightly chaotic daughter." "I'm not chaotic. I'm enthusiastic," Susan cut in proudly. "My enthusiastic daughter," Jason corrected, trying not to laugh. "And somehow, you loved both of us. You made us a family. You made us whole. You showed us that sometimes the stranger you help in the rain becomes the light that saves you both. So, will you marry us? Say yes. Say yes. I already picked my bridesmaid dress. The yellow one," Susan cheered. Allison burst into tears, but her smile shone so brightly it felt like it lit up the whole park. "Yes. Yes to both of you. Forever." Susan threw her arms around Allison so hard she nearly knocked her over. "I knew it! I told Daddy you'd say yes. Mrs. Baker owes me $5. "You bet on this?" Jason asked, stunned, sliding the ring onto Allison's finger. "Yes. I had insider information. I'm very good at this. I'm basically a matchmaking expert." The crowd erupted into applause. A few even wiped their eyes. An older woman shouted, "That's the cutest proposal I've ever seen." "Thank you. I helped plan it." Susan waved like she'd just won an Oscar. Jason pulled Allison in and kissed her, to Susan's dramatic, "Oh my gosh." And as soon as they parted, Susan asked, "So now, can we get ice cream?" This is definitely an ice cream moment. The wedding was planned for the following spring. Susan took her role as flower girl and unofficial wedding coordinator extremely seriously. So seriously that she made an impossibly long checklist and insisted on rehearsing. Repeatedly. "We have to practice, Dad. What if I forget how to toss the petals? What if I throw too hard and they hit someone in the face? The wedding photos will be ruined." "I think you'll do great." "I know I'll do great. I'm just being thorough. Professionals have to be." The wedding day arrived with that perfect kind of spring weather. The gentle, forgiving sunlight that makes everything look like it's beginning anew. The ceremony was held in a small garden, decorated with rows of white chairs, blossoms hanging lightly from branches, sunlight filtering through leaves like nature's own stage lights. Mrs. Baker, now practically Susan's grandmother, cried from the beginning to the end, every sniffle a testament to just how deeply moved she was. Michael Bennett, Jason's former public defender, served as best man. In his speech, he looked up, voice ringing clear. "In my career, I've seen many fair trials, but seeing these two find each other, that's something far beyond what any courtroom can deliver. That's the universe setting things right." Emily Rhodes, Allison's court clerk, was maid of honor and spent half the ceremony silently crying into a tissue. Susan, 8.5, and the half is very important, stood solemnly in her yellow dress that she absolutely insisted on wearing. Even though she had rehearsed walking down the aisle 40 times, when the real moment came, she hopscotched instead. "Jumping is more fun," she explained confidently. "Today is a happy day. Everyone should hop. It's scientifically proven to make people happier. I read it somewhere." When Pastor David Reynolds asked if anyone objected to the marriage, Susan whispered, just loudly enough for everyone to hear, "If anyone says anything, I'll fight them. I know 3 karate moves." The entire crowd burst into laughter, and Pastor Reynolds had to pause to regain his composure. When it was time for Susan to bring the rings, she carried the pillow as if it held the world's most precious treasure. Then she turned to the guests and announced proudly, "I just want everyone to know, I'm the one who brought them together. I'm basically a professional matchmaker. If anyone needs help finding love, see me after the wedding. My rates are very reasonable. Mrs. Baker, You're first on my list." Mrs. Baker nearly spat her champagne, and the crowd erupted into tear-wiping laughter. Jason's vows were simple, but overflowing with heart. He promised he would always stop to help strangers in the rain. Promised he would keep fixing things with duct tape and hope. Promised he would always be the father Susan deserved and the husband Allison never thought she would find. Allison promised she would always fight for justice, even when it was difficult. Promised she would use her magic gavel wisely. Promised she would embrace the beautiful chaos that came with loving an 8-year-old little tornado. And promised she would never take for granted the man who had shown her what integrity truly looked like. When the rings were exchanged, Susan whispered to Mrs. Baker, "This is the greatest thing I've ever done. I'm really good at matchmaking." At the reception, Susan took her self-appointed coordinator role very seriously, almost too seriously. She taught Emily Rhodes how to floss dance, scolded the DJ for choosing music that wasn't fun enough. We need more Encanto, way more. And made sure everyone at her table knew the love story of her dad and her new mom from beginning to end. So that's it. My dad fixed her car in the rain because he's kind. She saved him from the bad guy with her magic gavel because she's amazing. Then I drew a picture because I'm artistic. Then they fell in love because obviously they had to. Then I told them to get married, and they did. I'm smart like that. Any questions? A guest raised a hand. So you're saying you're responsible for this entire thing? Of course. I mean, they did their part too. But the brilliant plan was mostly mine. When Jason and Allison started their first dance, Allison leaned into his shoulder and whispered, "You know, I broke quite a few ethics rules because of you." Jason chuckled softly. "Worth it." She glanced at Susan, who was trying to teach Michael Bennett how to do the worm, making him look like he was about to snap his spine while she cheered enthusiastically. Then she looked back at the man who had stopped his car in the darkest storm of her life. "Every violation was worth it," Allison said, then kissed him as the crowd applauded. Susan shouted, "Find a room! Just kidding! I love this! Keep going!" Later, during what was supposed to be the father-daughter dance, but turned into a family dance because Allison refused to let either of them go, Susan looked up at them with a rare seriousness. "I'm really happy. Like, the happiest I've ever been in my whole life." "So am I," Jason said, voice breaking. "Me too," Allison said, pulling them both close. "Good. Because now I have a mom to teach me law, a dad to teach me how to fix stuff, and I'm going to be unstoppable. I'm going to rule the world one day." "That's what scares me," Jason laughed. "Oh, and also, can we get a dog now? Because families should have dogs. It's a rule. I checked." "We'll discuss it," both parents said at the same time. "Which means yes," Susan nodded wisely. "Great. I can feel you weakening already. Sometimes we think we already know how our life story will end." Jason once believed his would end in a cold courtroom, with the drop of a wooden gavel sealing his fate and tearing him away from his daughter forever. He once believed the world was a place where character meant nothing, a place where the system crushed people like him without mercy and without offering a second chance. But he was wrong, completely wrong. Rick Caldwell is now serving 5 years for fraud and embezzlement. The real evidence, once properly examined, was too clear, too overwhelming for anyone to deny. Justice was finally served, even if it had to take a path rarely found in law textbooks. For months, Jason had believed the system itself would destroy him. He had no idea that the system, in the form of a woman with a conscience stronger than her fear, had been fighting for him the entire time. As for Allison, for years she had delivered justice from behind a high wooden bench, issuing decisions that shaped hundreds of lives, believing that following the rules was the only way to do things right. But then she learned something. Sometimes The most righteous verdict you can render is the one that comes from the heart, even if it means bending rules written without room for compassion or human connection. And Susan, the bright 8-year-old girl, found a mother who taught her that being strong and being kind were never opposites. Taught her that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to believe in someone when the whole world has turned its back on them. Taught her that the magic hammer is real if you are brave enough to use it for good. And most importantly, taught her that adults often underestimate the matchmaking abilities of an 8-year-old with boundless imagination and unstoppable confidence. 3 people. A father who believed in stopping to help a stranger in the rain. A judge who believed in justice more than blind rule-following. And a little girl who believed that a tiny wooden gavel could drive away the bad in this world. Those 3 became a family, something none of them knew they had been searching for. And that made all the difference. If this story reminds you that kindness always finds its way back to you in the most unexpected ways, hit the subscribe button and share it with someone you think needs to hear this today. What is the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you? Tell us in the comments. Who knows? Your story might be the next one we tell, because each of us has the power to stop in the rain, and each of us is holding a magic hammer, if only we are brave enough to use it.